This week, Neil Desai from Greylog is with us to discuss SIEM pitfalls and challenges. Then Jeff Cairn from Forrester Research joins us to talk about the top trends in identity and access management. Finally, in the enterprise security news, big funding for Island. Is DLP finally getting disrupted by something that actually works? Hopefully. We learn all about model context protocol servers, integrating SSO and SSH. Do we have too many cybersecurity regulations already? Toxic cybersecurity workplaces. Napster makes a comeback. And this week we've got 50% less AI and 50% more co-hosts. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. This episode is sponsored by Fastly, the application security leader and edge cloud platform behind many top digital experiences. Fastly helps organizations deliver and secure online experiences for their end users through a modern, developer-friendly approach to security. With their next-gen WAF, bot management, and DDoS protections, teams have the tools they need to ensure their applications and APIs perform at their best without sacrificing speed or reliability. Discover how Fastly transforms security into an enabler for digital innovation at securityweekly.com/Fastly. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Spanish Paella Day. This is episode 400, recorded on Thursday, March 26, 2025. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining us is the Dean of Data Science, the Knight of Neurodiversity, the Watcher of Data Center Waste, Jackie McGuire. How you doing, Jackie?
What's good? I am well traveled and happy to be home, so I'm doing all right. I am also very caffeinated, as you had shared you are before we started recording. So yeah, I'm going to vibrate. This is very caffeinated.
Yeah. How about paella? When was the last time you had a good Spanish paella? Good seafood paella?
Man,
or have you ever?
Yeah, my brother and I went to. I'm supposed to say Ibiza. Right. And
yeah,
and
Ibiza.
I think 2009, I think that was actually the last time. I feel like I was in Barcelona more recently, but yeah, I had a really, really good hungover paella
nice.
in Ibiza at 3 p.m.
You were hungover, not the paella.
I don't know. I feel like everything in Ibiza is hungover at 3 p.m. There's no serotonin to be found.
Also joining us is the connoisseur of cloud security, our single origin co-host, probably also very caffeinated, and resident coffee sommelier, Ayman El-Sawa. How are you doing, Ayman?
Good, Adrian. I had my espresso at 5 a.m, and I'm still riding on it. It's
oh, wow.
I didn't have coffee for a few days, and so I guess I rebuilt my tolerance. And I did a workout. I was
dude. Oh, man. It's like a rocket ship. I've weaned myself off of caffeine before. And yeah, just the tiniest amount of caffeine, and it's a hell of a drug, man. When you're not when you're not having it every day, it packs a wallop.
I had a Vietnamese iced coffee at 5:30 when I flew out of Oakland a couple days ago, PM, and I got home. I just laid in bed until 5 a.m. and
stared at the ceiling.
Sleep is never happening. I don't know what they put in that stuff, but I was not sleeping.
Yeah, I might whip out the underground. Sorry, I might whip out the treadmill over here and start walking. So,
and finally joining us is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, Sean Metcalf. How are you doing, Sean? How caffeinated are you? Since that is the topic at hand.
I'm moderately caffeinated. I had a coffee this morning, so I'm letting it roll through the day. But my caffeine of choice is usually Coca-Cola, so I've been lightly caffeinating throughout the day with that.
A reliable source, for sure.
Yes.
All right. We've got a quick announcement here, and then we'll jump into the first interview. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2025 full conference pass. RSA will take place April 28th through May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. If you don't have hotel or airfare, go ahead and do that. I did notice the airfare was $1,000 less than it has been in the last 10 years. So that was surprising. Something happened there. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC25 and use the code 5U5SecWeekly. 5U5SecWeekly. Hope to see you there, and I will definitely be there. I'll be doing interviews in Broadcast Alley. All right, this interview is sponsored by Graylog, and today's topic is setting up your SIM for success. We're excited to have Neil Desai, a good friend of mine and product strategist over at Graylog with us today. Just complete coincidence that this is a sponsored discussion, and me and Neil talk all the time. We have lunch every now and then. Neil has a long background as a practitioner in financial institutions, building SOCs and SIMs. In the last years, he's been on the sell side, on the vendor side, helping build better products. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Unfortunately, I did not get the memo about the caffeine. So I am not very well caffeinated. I'm hydrated, but I'm not caffeinated.
Hopefully you're getting some of it. Maybe you'll get it by proxy over the various internet links here. Like we are all in very different places, but we have so much caffeine. Hopefully we've got a little bit extra for you.
Cool. It'll be secondhand caffeine. All right.
I just get contact caffeinated.
Yeah.
Contact caffeinated. That's a thing. Like when you're around a bunch of people with high energy, like your brain responds or something happens for sure. Yeah. So yeah, this is a great topic. And honestly, we're not going to be able to do it fully justice in the amount of time that we have. But I really do want to kind of jump into, from your own experiences, Neil, some of the pitfalls that people jump into, maybe some of the ways in which that they're not prepared, where they could have had a better chance at success if they had, maybe just not implemented it the way they did, or not threw 2,000 log sources in it, on day one, like I did the first time I set up my SIM. There's so many mistakes you can make here, Neil. What are some of the most, what is the most common mistake that you see?
So first thing is, right, we're in 2025, everyone just generally assumes they need a SIM if they don't have one, or if their SIM doesn't work, they need a new SIM. And they may be correct, they may not be, but let's stop for a moment and say, what problem is my SIM solving? Do I actually have a problem of too many logs? Well, if I do, then yeah, SIM's a great solution. But if I don't know that I have a lot of logs, why do I need a SIM? Right? So you go talk to someone like Sean, like, hey, you're the Windows person. You're my Windows enterprise. What does my logging look like in my Windows infrastructure? Can you help me understand how many domain controllers I have, how many servers, how many GPOs are deployed, how many OUs? Give me a concept so I can go, wow, that is a lot of logging. Yeah, there's no way I could do that manually. Okay, well, now I might need a SIM. But beyond that, it's okay, what logs is Sean going to give me, right? You might find out that he has different OUs with different GPOs and different logging policies. So the level of detail I can get is going to be different depending on where a server is. So I can't make the assumption that a particular group that has process level data isn't going to be seen by other servers. Right. And it's having this understanding of what is actually coming in before I can search. What I usually see is people will say, oh, there's a new threat report. Let me go search something in my SIM, do threat hunting. And it comes back clean. Like, all right, we're good. Nothing came back. It's like, well, did nothing come back because you don't have the data? Did nothing come back because the data left your system because you didn't scale it properly? Like, there's a lot of reasons why the results may not be correct. So it's understanding and applying a little bit more of like the good old sysadmin-y thing. Like, hey, I know what data is supposed to be coming in. I can verify it's coming in. I have periodic checks to say, hey, every, let's say, quarter we go and we verify, yep, we still have 11 domain controllers. No more, no less. Nothing's been added. Yep, Sean's going to go and walk me through and give me a screenshot of all the settings. Yep, they haven't changed. Good. Now I have a reasonable expectation on my searches. And I don't see a lot of that happening, right? Usually I see people have SIMs like, hey, I have a SIM, so I'm going to assume that everything has shown up to the SIM magically, properly, correctly, and nothing gets screwed up. It's like, no, there's a lot to the left that gets screwed up all day and night, and we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, I find most
But
companies don't have a logging policy, regardless of
Yeah.
size. They may adhere to different frameworks or guidelines or check different like regulatory boxes that say they log things, but there's not an actual company policy that says these are the logs we will collect. This is where they will be stored. This is who will have access to them, and this is the DLC that we're going to adhere to for these logs. Like I
Yeah.
have met enormous companies. Like you would be
Oh yeah.
yeah, who have no
There's
policy
a lot of
whatsoever.
assumptions made there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
So
think,
I
like
actually went
yeah,
one step back and created a generic logging policy that said things like, hey, you need to have a timestamp in the log and it needs to have up to nanosecond granularity. And I can get into the story of why later. It has to have a username that is recognizable amongst all my logs, right? I need to have a location, like an IP address or a host name or both of where the activity happened. Was it a successful thing or a non like failure? And what happened? Like, so it was like certain amount of fields I need to have, and it wasn't prescriptive, it was descriptive of what needed to happen. And the great thing is we got that signed off by internal audit, external audit, legal, a whole bunch of other business units, because then I could go, okay, Sean, you're the Windows enterprise person. This is the logging policy. What do you need to do on your domain controller to meet this? And you go, oh, cool. I just set the GPO up this way, and now I've met your logging policy.
yeah,
The great thing with that is once Sean gets done with his document, when something breaks in production, I just take that document, give it to a sysadmin and say, hey, can you just check these settings, make sure they're still there? And there's a good chance like something got messed up somewhere, and that's why the logs don't look the way they do. But yeah, there's a lot of things there that just need to be done that are very basic, to your point, Jackie, that people just haven't done.
yeah, and I think,
just to back up,
if that policy is signed off on, your job is probably also secure in the event something really goes south. Because, and this is what I found with consulting CFOs during the financial crisis, is like, if you can say, hey, we all agreed on this policy, we followed it, and things didn't go well, that's a lot better than we didn't have a policy, so I did what I thought was the right thing. There's a lot of blame that you're taking on in that case.
Yeah. Yeah, just to go back to the beginning of what you said there, Neil, I think that's something that not really having a plan, not knowing why you're doing a thing, because maybe your CISO told you needed to, or your auditor told you needed to, or your SOC 2 says that you're going to do it, or, whatever. There's all these drivers. Why are you having a pen test? Why are you buying a SIEM?
Yeah.
Why are you setting up a SOC? And without good answers to those questions, we don't know how to ensure that the right logs that we need are in there, because we don't know what scenarios to simulate, what kind of tabletop we're going to go through that's going to lead us to realize, are those logs turned on? We should probably check that.
Yeah. What problem are you solving? Right? Are you solving the problem of, I must buy something? Well, buying a product is not solving
too
a
much
problem.
Budget, getting rid of money. That's the problem.
I have way too much money, so I'm going to go buy the most expensive thing. I've actually seen companies do that. But right when you're working for a company, it's like, all right, I need to solve a problem. And so what is the problem that the SIEM solves? Right. And can you do more than that? Right. A lot of people just go, well, I have a SIEM and I'm going to keep it with security. One of the reasons I was more successful is we democratized the data to everyone. So part of my give get with the sysadmin is like, hey, Sean, if you're going to give me logs, I will give you access to all your logs. How would you like that? Then you're like, you know what? There's a reason for me to give Neil my logs, because when I'm troubleshooting something, I can have access to those logs and I don't have to own the product. I don't have to own the central log management. Neil just gives me access to my own data back. Right. So it's kind of a win-win. I was like, Sean, can you just do me a favor and every year in your budget, put a little bit in there for storage for your logs? I was like, yeah, I would have had to do that anyway. So why don't I just give it to you? But yeah, there's just a lot of basics there that people kind of go through, that they.
John, you look like you have a question.
Hi, I have a question. I have many questions. One of the things that always kind of puzzles me when I think about the SIEM and getting logs. You mentioned, let's say you have 12 domain controllers. I'm pretty certain that most organizations are not set up well for when they stop getting logs from any one of those. Like one of them, for some reason, stops sending logs. What is the best strategy for ensuring that the data sources are actually sending logs into the SIEM, so that way the SIEM could go, hey, I haven't received any logs from this source in an hour, 12 hours, 24 hours.
That's a great thing that you brought up, Sean, right? So losing logs is a big deal, right? Because some of it could be regulatory, some is just evidence you want to make sure you have it. Different SIMs have different ways, and usually it's an all or nothing, right? I can say you have absolutely received no logs in X amount of time. And that's kind of an easy thing to do. What I like to do though is I've received significantly less logs than I normally do. So I haven't received 0, but if I'm normally doing like 1,000 events per second, and now I'm doing 10 events per second, that's a drastic change. On the flip side, the one that people rarely do, am I receiving more data than I used to? I was a firewall admin. I'm going to admit there are times where I'm debugging a rule and I turn on logging, and I swear in 24 hours, I'm going to turn off that log, and I forget. And next, you know, the volume of logs is shot through the roof, right? And the problem is when you build a SIM, you've already said, well, I'm going to get X amount of data, and I do the math and I figure I need this much storage to hold 90 days worth of data. Well, what happens when you get way more logs than you expect? All of a sudden, your 90 days worth of data is 80 days worth of data, 50 days worth of data, right? And it just kind of cascades from there. But the other thing real quick is when you have that log outage, how long do you have to recover? Right? So on a Windows, it's like, okay, well, I can increase the local file size from the default. I know it's a circular buffer, so it'll hold so much on the domain controller. I can run a PowerShell script and understand what are the events per second on the domain controller and go, okay, that domain controller's logs are going to roll over in 15 minutes. Cool. I have 7 minutes to make a decision on fixing the problem or failing over to another device to collect the logs from that domain controller, so I can not have an outage. Right. And there's ways to do that, but it's, you know, to Adrian's point, it's this thought process of how do you actually architect it, not just going, well, I'm getting the logs from some server, so it must be all the servers, and it must be the right servers.
It's basically the log life cycle, right?
Yeah, understanding, right? Like if it's syslog, guess what? If it stops, those logs are probably just sitting on the host itself. How do I grab those all logs back? And just having that idea of what do I do when logs stop?
Yeah. And it happens a lot. Like there's a lot of manual parsing that happens. And I think we're starting to have, you know, software that can replace this, but if the log format changes even slightly and you're using regex to parse it into something intelligible, I had that happen building a SIM. Is like, oh, hey, we just stopped collecting logs for a while. I don't know what happened. And, you know, it's observability isn't the first thing that security people think that they need for data, but it's crucial to your point. Just, we don't need AI tools. You just need to notice when things change from what they normally are, which is basic regression.
Yeah, so we have a used bookstore here. Adrian probably knows it's McKay's, and out front they have this this bin of free books of just random stuff. And so if you were to go to that bin and
they can't charge anything for those books, they're just they're not worth even putting the price tag on, right?
Yeah, they're so esoteric. Like who knows what you're ever going to find in there? So it's kind of like, you know, a great treasure hunt in there and there. But you can't guarantee you're going to get any answer from that bin because you have no idea if the book even exists. However, if you go to a regular bookstore and you're like, well, I have a question about computer science. Cool. You go to the section on computer science, right? And everything is organized and you can know what's there. But unfortunately, people don't treat their data the same way, right? There's just high expectations without any validation of, hey, it's in there.
You know, one of the things
I just want to interject with a quick question on Neil. It's been a while since I think 2012 was the last time I played with a SIM. In your example with the firewall, you turn on too many logs. Is it still the case that if it like exceeds your licensing, obviously if it exceeds the system's capability to pull it in, you could drop logs, you know, but are you still going to drop stuff if you exceed that like 10,000 EPS or 100,000 EPS, like whatever the events per second is?
I think it really depends on the SIM vendor and how they calculate their license and space. Some will say, well, we'll give you so much grace period. You could have so many overages a month. Some might say, hey, we're going to bring the logs in, but drop functionality until you pay us more money to get with these logs. Some might be, hey, we don't care. As long as you have the storage for it, you're good to go.
But either way, it would be good to know that. I would
still be good to know because when
before it happens
for a longer period of time,
before it happens and you're like, yeah, we don't have that log because we didn't pay them enough money.
Yeah. I've been
to a lot of places like, hey, you know, we're doing PCI. We know we have 90 days. I'm like, cool. Let's look at what is the 90th day from today. I want you to go to a 5-minute search for day 90. and they come back with nothing. I'm like, all right, let's go to day 75. And all of a sudden, like, we're at day 15, we're getting data. I'm like, oh, just because you configured your storage for 90 days doesn't mean you can actually hold 90 days worth of data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a misconception on how storage works for some people.
Yeah. Security teams will just turn logs off to avoid going
Yeah.
over their license. So the noisy ones, the internal firewall traffic, the cloud VPN log, like all the silly stuff, they'll turn them off. And I used to talk about that all the time. Like, do you think attackers don't know that the last 2 days of the month are the best days to try to breach a company because some of those things might be turned off?
Yeah.
Or as an attacker, you go ahead and turn off logging, so that way the logs of what you're doing doesn't even get to the SIEM.
Yep.
Yeah. So Neil, one of the things working with SIEMs for like my entire career, actually, that's kind of how I started, and all sorts of SIEMs. One of the things that has been frustrating when going on a platform is like having to do field extractions. Like, what's available out of the box? If I'm going to add this app, I want to know that you have field extractions for this app, and I don't have to sit there and create them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Versus doing it using an open source tool, right? What's been your experience? Building field extractions for all the different apps and standardizing that.
That is probably one of the worst jobs ever because you're stuck in a really hard place. You have a vendor who, since you don't pay anything to them, they're not beholden to help you do anything. Yeah. They might just say, here are docs, but their docs don't actually reflect what their product does, right? But then you have customers who actually want it parsed. So it is a very hard thing to do, to continue to keep up with version upgrades of particular things, getting access to real logs from maybe customers or something. So it is definitely hard to do. Some companies are getting a little bit better and saying, hey, we're going to standardize on a log format. When I was at Elastic, they worked with getting people to write things in Elastic Common Schema. When I was at ArcSight, they got people to write things in Ceph. So part of it is, right, if you have a standard and you're big enough, can you get the vendors to say, hey, one of my options in my output or my logging stream is a format that's supported right out of the box, so that the SIEM vendor is not having to figure out, how do I translate this field and that field and things like that.
Maybe
that's always going to be a pain, is field extraction.
Has anyone tried getting LLMs to write those? Because I know there's been success with writing like detections and YAML and config files and things like that, but I don't know about parsers. I've not seen if anybody's just handed them a file and said, make me a parser for this.
There are people that use ML and AI to help write parsers, but I still believe using regular expressions to write parsers is probably one of the worst things you can do, because regular expressions have their own inherent performance issues. But you'll see most SIEM people are not computer science people, right? The people writing SIEMs are like, oh, I have a text file, so I will treat it as text. And the only way you parse text is with a regex. And you call it a win because you parsed a single file. I'm like, okay, but if I have 1 million events per second coming in, how does my regex perform?
Yeah.
Right. And in that case, it's more about how quickly can I fail the regex rather than successful, because in any given time, you're not going to match every single line. You're going to match only a subset of them.
What is there a standard that you would recommend for on either side? I mean, I've worked with companies where in their application, they're trying to make their application friendly for SIEM vendors to consume. So what's a format that you would recommend?
Anything that their vendors easily parse and support. If they already have a field naming, that's great. So the easiest thing is just to do a field rename, right? So if you have, let's say, an internal standard that you say, this is how we name, username, IP address, regardless of what vendor you go to, it's easy for you to figure out how to do that parity matching, right? So you don't have to necessarily go with a vendor specific naming convention, but having a naming convention that at least everyone in the app side can write to.
Like as Greylog, what format would you like to see everyone, top few?
Well, we have our own. We have the Greylog information model, right? Elastic has Elastic Common Schema. There's OCSF, which is, from AWS and other people. So I don't think schema necessarily matters per se, because they're all going to have their good and their bad with it. But just having something standardized is the big thing, right? Especially as you cross applications.
Gotcha.
What gets really hard is when you start going to cloud and things are extremely different in cloud than on-prem, right? It's like, how do you understand things? And what are fields that cloud has that on-prem doesn't have?
Right.
Things like, hey, what is my
VPC is very important in AWS, right? Yeah.
Or just instance types, right? So you can say, oh, normally here are the 5 instances types my company runs. Why is it running this gigantic instance out of nowhere? That's odd, right? And it's
And
like, hey, guess
tags,
what? Someone
like
got, a crypto miner is running and doing a whole bunch of stuff. Who knows?
like the idea of tagging was fairly new in cloud, and I think a really useful feature. Kind of this general purpose, like show me everything that's categorized as PCI, right?
Yeah.
That we didn't have with older systems. So yeah, and hopefully that. Yeah, I don't know if that ever backported into like vSphere and non-cloud technologies and stuff like that, but hopefully that's out there. Made it into more products that are not cloud.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it wasn't OCSF supposed to solve all of these problems and create harmony across security? Wasn't that what was going to happen last
Isn't
year
there
or the
that
year
funny thing?
before?
The great thing about standards is there's so many of them to choose from.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And that's the problem, right? Is there's so many standards, and this has been going on for years. Every now and then someone comes out with a logging standard that everyone gets excited to do, and then no one implements. Right. And this has happened over and over. This has come from how do you get logs from point A to point B? How do you rename things? And so it has yet to be solved because there's no incentive,
Well,
Yeah.
for
right? Who's going to put the work in?
technology, I
Yeah.
think technology has a longer shelf life than people think it does. And that's like, if you look at the auto industry, it's a lot easier to implement standards everybody has to adhere to because cars turn over pretty frequently. And you do have classic and older cars, but the rate at which they retire is fast. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of enterprises. There's a lot of old ass Windows Vista and just
Yeah.
crap out there. And I think that's part of what makes it hard to adhere to one standard is that there are both lots of legacy use cases and then the velocity of change now is there's tons of new use cases. So and it's part of what makes it hard to maintain is that we won't all adopt it. Like if there were 2
Yeah.
standards to maintain, it would be easier. So it's one of those things where we don't want regulation, but I don't see how to fix this absent regulation.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I want to touch on, Neil, is we've touched on a little bit, like how do you know when you stop getting logs?
Yeah.
Like it sounds like we're implying a lot of the work is on the customer here, right? To
Yeah.
build these kinds of checks and things like that, you have to expect to have to do this sort of thing, and then how do you know that you've got the right logs going in there? There anything you suggest to any frameworks or processes that you would recommend to make sure that you're getting the right logs in there? And then one of the other things you mentioned was you think you have 90 days,
Yeah.
but you don't. Like there's all these assumptions going on. Like I think I've got all the logs I need. I think I've got them for as long as I need. And I think the ones that are coming in are still coming in, but
Yeah.
like how do you set up the checks and the processes for all this stuff
It's definitely a lot of work.
in 3
right?
minutes
So-
or less?
in 3 minutes or less, right? So a lot of it is understanding your assets and then building modeling around that, right? So in my situation, we had 12 domain controllers. I had to have a different timer on those because I know I only had a 15-minute window to react. For my membered servers,
Yeah.
I had half
And when
an
it's
hour
gone,
to
it's
react.
gone, right?
Yeah, once it's gone. So it's like you have 15. Well, you actually had 7 minutes to react because you had to fail over to something else and verify you're getting things in 15 minutes or less.
Yeah.
I had other servers like, hey, I could have 30 minutes to react. And so we built these timers and said, hey, generally, here is the level of log rotation and how long I can go before I have to react, right? We had some offices out in the middle of nowhere. It might be 20 days before their log rolled over. Guess what? I don't have to react it anytime soon. I could take a vacation and still get the log. Not that I would, but you had a lot longer to react. And it's just understanding what's in your environment, understanding how are you going to deal with it when it happens, but also understanding if it rolls over an X amount of time, do I have the ability to fix it or do I have to call someone else? The more people that get involved, the less time I have to actually work on the issue, right? So if I have to call a sysadmin and I have to call a third person, that 15 minutes might be down to 5 minutes. Right. And then I have to work with everyone else. There's just a lot that goes involved. As far as write logs, that's a hard one because it depends on what you're doing for a living. Right. What do you want to go with? Do you care about MITRE? Do you not care about MITRE? Do you care about insider threat? And again, it's what are you trying to solve? For me to generically say, Adrian, these are the logs you need, probably not the best approach. I can generically say authentication logs are always going to be good for something, somehow, somewhere.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's like, all right, well, what actually are you doing? What do you want to solve? How big is your company? How many people do you have to react to the situation? If I give you all the data you need and you have no one permanently assigned to the SOC, what's the point of doing all that work?
Yeah.
So there's just a lot there. Again, wish we could solve that in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
We need to help people choose to use an MSP because I think that's the answer. I was reading a survey that showed that the smaller a company is, the less likely they are to think that they need a service provider, which is so counterintuitive. And I think some of it has to do with people just don't know how to pick one or when to pick one or why to pick one. And I think helping people choose service providers would be a great first step towards solving some of these issues.
And you still have the problem to solve there, right? Because, maybe you go to investigate something, you say, where are these logs? And your MSP's like, you didn't tell us to gather you didn't give us access to those logs.
Yeah.
So you still kind of have to know. I would guess. I've never done a managed SIEM.
Yeah. There's a lot that needs to be done on the engineering side on the left of logs before anyone gets it, whether it's you, whether it's an MSP, a lot of documentation knowing, but it sets you up for success later on. Even if you're not getting audited, when you do get audited, having all that information makes an audit go so much smoother. Right? That's what you don't want as your auditor comes in, you're freaking out, trying to get all your documentation, last minute screenshots. It's like, that shouldn't be the way it is.
Yeah. Should not. PCI panic mode, I used to call it when I was a QSA. Everybody just runs around panicking, trying to get, did we get clean scans last quarter? Yeah. And what do you do when you don't? I don't know.
Yeah.
You just, nothing. Right. Neil, thank you so much for joining us. A great conversation, a lot of good tips in here. I think we did fit a lot into that last 3 minutes and the 27 minutes before that. So thank you so much for being with us today. This is great.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciated it.
And make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Graylog to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk identity and access management trends with Jeff Caron from Forrester Research.